Okay, let's talk about introductions. The biggest error I see at the junior level is specifically students who at some point were told that they don't need to write a funnel intro or that they just never learn the funnel intro. And so something emblematic of what I see is here in this wrong example, an introduction that just dives into the text we're talking about, like Beowulf and Grendel, and then just starts explicating general thoughts about themes that might be relevant to the thesis. That's by definition not a funnel. The funnel intro is supposed to start with something that grabs your attention, get narrower and narrower over the course of a paragraph towards the thesis. So let's talk about the fundamental components of the funnel intro. The first thing you need is a hook, something that'll grab attention. I think we all know what this is like. A quotation, an interesting start to an anecdote, something that seems like it shouldn't belong in an English paper. But of course, the magic trick, if the funnel intro has one, is finding a way to make that hook relevant to a paper. It's about drawing connections. The hook context further develops the hook and starts to give enough background that A, the hook doesn't seem completely undeveloped, but B, you start unpacking the things in the hook that are going to be relevant to the thesis. Okay, you need to have an eye towards your thesis and thinking about what hook context is relevant. Let's take a quick look at the example to see this in action. So the hook here is that Iron Man is one of the most famous superheroes in Marvel Comics. Okay, that seems like something that shouldn't belong in an English essay, but I look forward to seeing how it will work. The thing that a hook context would do poorly, if it was chosen poorly, would be to talk about stuff about Iron Man that just has no relevance to the thesis. Well, what's the thesis about? In this case, it's about heroism and constant jealousy of others. Okay. So hopefully, we're going to be talking about something that deals with that in the hook context. Iron Man is admired not only because he is a billionaire, but a genius inventor who is an ordinary man. With the help of his self-made suit, he can save the world along with the iconic Avengers. Okay, this is rather weak hook context. This last sentence here is what kind of saves us. The reasoning behind Iron Man's fame is his heroic nature and the jealousy of his billion-dollar lifestyle. Okay, so he's talking less about what Iron Man cares about and more why people like Iron Man, his heroism, and people feel jealousy, and that's sufficient to give people meaning. Okay, now we move to the third component of the funnel intro, which is the transition. This is the most critical sentence in my mind of the funnel introduction. To make things work, you're going to have to build a bridge between the hook and the thesis. That's always the case. And the transition is that key bridge that lets you get from hook context over here to thesis context down here. Let's see how this works. These two characteristics, heroism and jealousy, are two ideas that provide meaning throughout time. In fact, some of literature's earliest writers pondered whether a person can be motivated by heroism and jealousy. So something that a transition is always going to do is it's always going to use some language like this idea, these concepts, this notion, and then you've got to build that bridge. They transcend time. They are timeless. They happen in many places. This is something that is common to human experience. Some kind of sentence that gives us some way to get from the hook context to the thesis context by talking about the idea that whatever's happening in the hook, it happens in the thesis too. Once we use the transition, we get to the thesis context, which will be used to set up background for the thesis. So one example of these early writers is the poet who composed Beowulf. This question is not limited to early works of a contemporary writer who contemplates the same issues as John Gardner. Okay, so this is a little more verbose than the average thesis context would be, but because this is a thesis dealing with two works, you've got to give background on two works. And then in both the ancient poem and Gardner's modern twist, characters strive for meaning and find that meaning in jealousy and heroism. Okay, we're getting pretty close to the thesis. Suddenly, finally, we're at the thesis. Throughout Seamus Heaney's Beowulf and John Gardner's Grendel, the pursuit of heroism, the constant jealousy of others are two ideas that create meaning. Okay, so let's just quickly summarize for the end. The hook needs to grab our attention. The hook context needs to develop enough ideas about the hook that you can set yourself up for the transition. The transition needs to talk about the prevalence of those ideas throughout time in multiple places. The thesis context needs to establish that those ideas apply to whatever books the thesis is about as well. And then finally, the thesis will articulate what the argument will be about that controlling idea.